Welcome to CivilNet. Today we're honored to have as our guest, a very special guest in fact, Susan McKay, who is the Press Ombudsman for the Republic of Ireland, a well-known author and journalist who has written for the New York Times, The Guardian, The New Yorker, and the London Review of Books. Thank you for joining us, Ms. McKay.
Thank you.
When I was reading your bio, one of the first things I noticed is you're actually a press ombudsman. And we've all heard of human rights ombudsmen. And I was really taken by that. What does that even mean? Because in a way it's gratifying, in other ways, if it's the wrong state, it's scary. Can you explain what is it that you do and what does that role actually mean?
Yeah, it's a Swedish word, and there's an argument about whether it's a gendered word or not, because obviously it ends with the word M-A-N.
Yeah.
So as the first woman to hold the role, I like to be referred to as the Press Ombudsperson.
Okay.
Because I think that when women get into roles like this, it's important to note that they're no longer the province of men. But anyway, that's a small argument. My job is to run a self-regulatory system whereby all of the main publications, newspapers and online publications in Ireland have signed up to this code of practice, which is 11 principles about how to conduct ethical journalism. And the system was set up in 2007 to try to avoid the state regulating journalism. So it's principles like privacy, truth and accuracy, distinguishing fact and comment. So it's basically the newspapers say, we will strive to always tell the truth and to carry out our research.
The code of conduct.
It's a code of principles more than a code of conduct. And it's entirely based on the ethics of journalism. So it's about journalism being done properly in such a way that it's most likely to produce a truthful and reliable outcome. And people who don't feel that has happened, if they feel that a newspaper has published something which invades their privacy or which is untrue, they can complain to the Press Ombudsman, which is me, and I'll look at the report and I'll look at the code that they say has been breached, and I'll say, well, actually, this article appears to have been properly researched. There is nothing to suggest that your privacy was breached. Or I might say, they shouldn't have published that photograph of your child. That was an invasion of your child's privacy. So it's kind of a system of people submitting to agreeing that they share a set of ethical values. And it has been in existence now since 2007. So hopefully it is working for people. I'm concerned always to make sure that people know about it so that, if they have a complaint, they can make it. And I think that's really important at the moment, because you do have an element of people who are saying that, society is full of disinformation and that, the mainstream media is basically in the pay of the government and all of these things. And I think if you have a code of principles, you can say to those people, okay, make a complaint. Let's investigate this. Let's see, is it really a matter of disinformation, or is it a matter of properly researched journalism?
Okay. That's quite interesting. I can tell you, I hardly imagine like any of the major countries in the world would ever adopt this model, because no major media in most countries would ever want to put themselves through this.
Well, actually, you're wrong, because there are press councils all over Europe and in other places as well. There's an association of independent press councils of Europe, which has a lot of members and new members joining. So it is a system which works, and it's not a punitive system, and it's not a set of rules. It's very it's not prescriptive. So if you sign up to this, you're basically signing up to traditional journalistic values. And it works for democracy to keep those values at a time that anybody who picks up a camera thinks that they're a journalist, or anybody who can, make a note in a phone thinks that they're a journalist. So it's really important that people who uphold the traditional values of journalism can actually band together and say, this is what we believe in. I mean, our code of principles is very like the code of principles that the National Union of Journalists, for example, has for its people.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'm always skeptical, but I'll take your word for it. I'm going to bring this, your experience, and then try to see how it fits into our world here regionally. Obviously, you come from Northern Ireland, from Derry, where you've had, lack of a better phrase, the troubles. Obviously, the struggle, the fight, historic in some sense, going back hundreds of years, in some senses new. And one thing that I noticed, especially in the Western press, is the reaction to what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh last year, which was the ethnic cleansing. And I was thinking, in your case, I mean, what would the world have thought if the British government thought that the way to solve the problem in Northern Ireland is to ethnically cleanse the Catholics out of Northern Ireland? And I suspect that the reaction would not be the same as it was last year, in which it was crickets for the most part, or on a political circles, it was actually okayed, green-lighted in many ways. What explains the difference? I think about this very often. What explains this difference? Is it cultural? Is it prejudice? Is it preconceived notions of who has rights and who hasn't?
I think it's probably all of those things. I mean, it's a constant thing with Ireland is, some tragedy happens in some other part of the world, some atrocity is afflicted on people in some part of the world, and the first question in the Irish media was, were any Irish people there? Were any Irish people affected? And so you could have like 120,000 people killed. Irish man from Ballybuffet was injured. It is a thing that we do tend to prioritise the local, and it does become problematic because, for example, at the moment, there's a huge difference in the way that the world covers, or I can't speak for the world, I can speak for the UK and Ireland. There has tended to be a great deal more emphasis, for example, on the Russia-Ukraine war than there has been in the media on perhaps Palestine and Israel and the background of that. So there are all these value judgments which are historical and cultural that attach to different places. And I think it's really important to discuss that, and that people who edit, people who are the editors who decide what's going to be published and what's going to be broadcast, really need to keep those value judgments in mind. Why are we covering the situation in one country and we're ignoring the situation in another? But if you go back to, you mentioned the fact that I'm from Derry. In the early years of the conflict in the north of Ireland, the coverage of some of the things that happened then was extremely skewed by the fact that the broadcasters had a very British narrative of what Northern Ireland was. And that meant sort of keeping silent about a lot of the political realities in the place. So you would have had atrocities which were reported as being something that they absolutely were not, So that presumably is still happening in a lot of places. And it's concerning that at a time when media outlets are not investing as much in their foreign coverage because they say they don't have the money to do so. How are we getting true stories? You're taking them from other people. Have they got another kind of cultural investment in representing things in certain ways? It's a complex question, but I think that it's one that really needs to be constantly borne in mind, what actually is happening in the world. I did not hear about what happened, that the ethnic cleansing that you were talking about, because generally speaking, I don't think I've ever heard Armenia discussed in the Irish media. We did hear quite a lot about when the ethnic cleansing was happening in Bosnia, probably because it's closer to Ireland, it's more part of Europe, it's seen as being more of interest. But yeah, I mean, we are very obsessed with the local.
Let's talk about the role of media in the modern world. What is the role of media in the modern world in which, by any standard, things seem to be getting worse, and worse, where you can have mass murder in a location, or what some people consider genocide, and what does free media even mean in an era where political actors feel they have a carte blanche to do things that would have been unacceptable 10, 15 years ago? And how much has media failure fed into that brazenness of the worst actors in the world to do horrible things?
I think a lot depends upon who owns the media, and therefore who has the right to construct the narrative. The people who have an investment in the media dictate to some extent what it's going to say. Like if your funders are America, for example, are you really going to be able to tell stories that don't present the US in an attractive light? Similarly, there have been in the past instances in Ireland where the government has intervened to stop certain things being said. During the conflict in the north, for example, there was a period when spokespersons from a particular political party were banned from broadcasting. And
Sinn Féin.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether people here know about what Sinn Féin is, but it was the party that represented republicanism, but it also, as far as the government was concerned, represented terrorism. So therefore they said, we're not having terrorist spokespersons on the TV and radio. But in fact, journalists subverted that in interesting ways, because in the north, where they also had a broadcasting ban on spokespersons for that party, journalists developed a process whereby they had actors who would come in and voice the people from what people were saying from the political parties. So as a result, people began to think that, oh, that's what so-and-so's voice sounds like. And then when they would actually meet that person, they'd say, no, you're not who you're saying you are. Because I've heard that person on the radio. So journalists don't take to censorship, but there definitely is censorship. There's sensitivity. There's, no, we are not going to call that genocide. Yes, we will call this genocide. No, we are not going to investigate that. Yes, we will investigate this. And it's a matter of that. This is why an ethical code of principles is very valuable, because it does guide people towards actually making their decisions based on the evidence rather than on a story that they think they already know.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about your experience in journalism. What do you think is the best example in your career, during your time period, of journalism essentially doing its job and bringing something to light that wasn't? And what is the worst example of the failures of journalism around the world over the last 30, 40 years?
Well, in terms of Ireland, I think one of the, I'm never great at what's the best as such, but one really, really important story that has dramatically changed Ireland culturally is the story of the abuse of children in the Catholic Church, you know, which was very much brought to the fore by journalists who began to listen to people who were telling stories about their own personal experience. And those people had been ignored for years. First of all, they were silenced by shame. But then when they did begin to speak out, for a while, people just kind of were really uncomfortable about it and didn't do anything about it. And the media at that stage was quite paternalistic and didn't pay much attention. But then in around the late 1970s, early 1980s, journalists began to actually investigate these stories, and the Catholic Church resisted and tried to stop investigations, and they tried to rely by saying, I can remember ringing up the Catholic press office and being told, oh no, we obey canon law, we don't have to abide by the laws of the state. And it took a long time, but that has really changed now. And there's a lot more of a sense of freedom and of people being able to tell their own stories. And, you know, we've discovered that at a certain phase in Irish life in the 1950s and 1960s into the 1970s, like a huge amount of people were just institutionalized in Ireland. And it's not a good story for a country that claims to have got its liberation from Britain, you know, to be a free republic and yet to have sustained all this terrible, terrible abuse of people. So it's that's been a very, very important collective journalistic enterprise. But of course, the primary people who must get credit for that are the people who are willing to speak out about their own experiences.
I'm going to close with it starts with a sort of a comment and then it'll end with a question. And here we're used to the Western press, some of them from major press sources. You know, they'll come here as part of EU packages or whoever, USAID or whoever, and they're always here to educate, you know, journalists here. Not that people don't need education, but they always talk about the fake news and how to fight fake news. And then you open up the BBC or whatever, the New York Times, and if it's the right country that invades, they don't invade, they enter. If the right country bombs, they made a mistake. The wrong country bombs, they were murdering. So I always have this temptation. It's like, who are you kidding? I mean, you're giving us these standards that you don't live by. So my question, just from a very practical point of view, from your job, who is more dangerous, a mainstream press that lies or conceals or doesn't put in the right context, or a bunch of idiots posting 30-second videos on TikTok? Who does more damage and who's more responsible?
Well, first of all, I should say I came here to talk about something which we do in Ireland at the invitation of some press organisations in Armenia.
I'm not talking about you.
No, I know you're not, but I need to say that I do think that there is a dreadful practice of journalists being sent by their outlets into foreign countries and they're told, you know, okay, when you step off the plane, you must immediately start broadcasting. You must immediately show our viewers that we have invested in sending you to this place. So you must be seen to be a world expert on it immediately. And people are no longer given the time to investigate things even properly before they start speaking. But yeah, you're absolutely right that you know, there's a lot of pernicious narratives which are spun by people who consider themselves to be part of free presses. But I think that there's a lot of very responsible, mostly unionized journalists now who insist that the truth is a value worth pursuing, and the existence of people who just pick up a camera and start faking news and faking stories or telling lies, that should be an incentive to the media to redouble its efforts to do traditional journalism, which involves investigation and involves in checking your sources and finding evidence for what you report. But there are obviously huge cultural factors at play. I mean, because I am from the north of Ireland and because I worked there as a journalist for many years, I would have often been asked by visiting journalists from elsewhere to bring them to places, introduce them to people. And I've often seen that thing where people come thinking they already know the story and they become quite impatient if they find that the story is different.
It's a different narrative.
You know, and they're really annoyed because you won't take them to show them something because you say, no, that doesn't exist. That's not a thing. That's not happening. And they say, but it is, you know. And it's quite extraordinary. I mean, you always have to have the humility, I think, as a journalist to accept that you're here to find out what the story is. You're not here to tell the local people what the story is. And I do think that ethical self-regulation by the press has a very strong role to play in that. You know, that the code of the Irish Press Council says you will strive for truth and accuracy. You will not present comment as if it is fact. And if you're going to make comments, they have to be rooted in the facts. So those are values worth fighting for at a time when it's much easier just to pick up a camera and say you're a journalist.
Well, it was a pleasure having you, Ms. McKay.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at ＳիվիլՆեթ.